Constantinople was the capital of the Byzantine Empire and the center of trade connecting Asia and East Europe. During their reign, Ottomans and Vikings tried to conquer the Byzantine Empire many times, but in 1453 it finally fell to the Ottoman Turks.
Despite Constantinople's impressive 20 kilometers of walls, the small defending force of 7,000 men could not hold out against the 50 to 80,000 Ottoman soldiers. The Ottoman army still faced severe casualties, however, as they made several unsuccessful attacks during the siege. After the attack was complete, the Ottoman soldiers were allowed to plunder the city for 3 days. After these 3 days were up, Sultan Mehmed II established Constantinople as the new Ottoman capital. Additionally, the fall of Constantinople helped the Renaissance progress in Italy, as many intellectuals fled the city during the attack.
In 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered what he thought was India, but it was actually the Americas. Since he thought he was in India, he called the native people there Indians. When Christopher made his voyages to the New World, he brought many diseases including smallpox, measles, and influenza. Then he finally returned to Spain in 1500. In 1497, a Portuguese explorer named Vasco da Gama discovered a sea lane to India. This was a direct route from Europe to India.
Using the monsoon winds, Vasco da Gama and his crew made the trip from the Cape of Good Hope to India in only 23 days.
On his way back from his voyage, one half of everyone died from the disease scurvy.
This is because Vasco da Gama decided to neglect the monsoon winds on his return trip, making the return trip take 132 days instead of the original 23. Columbus's voyages increased European interest in the Americas, and thus encouraged seafaring nations such as Portugal and Great Britain to colonize the Americas alongside the Spanish. One important example of colonization is Jamestown, which was created in 1607 as the first British colony in the Americas. The natives had differing reactions to the colonists, as some aided them with offerings of food and farming techniques, while others attacked settlers and killed their livestock. Triangular trade was the first global trade network, forming a triangle between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Europeans went to Africa to find slaves, either kidnapping and capturing them, or trading local slave raiders guns in exchange for slaves. Going from Africa to the Americas, slaves had to endure the harsh Middle Passage, where slaves were chained below deck and given little food and water. This was a breeding ground for germs and disease, and these diseases were the main factor in the massive death count of Native Americans. Slaves who survived the Middle Passage were forced into rough plantation labor, where they would farm for cash crops such as tobacco, cotton, and sugarcane. In the Americas, slaves formed a unique culture that we now know as African Americanism, combining aspects of their home cultures together to form new syncretic religions and beliefs, such as voodoo and blues and jazz music. The final leg of the voyage was from the Americas to Europe, where traders brought back American crops such as potatoes and grains, alongside cash crops such as tobacco, to be sold in Europe. The American food crops that were brought back to Europe were the most important factor in the large population increase in Europe during the early modern era. Prior to European interaction, Native Americans did not use domesticated animals because they only had animals such as llamas and alpaca. This all changed, however, once Europeans brought domesticated animals such as horses, pigs, cattle, and dogs, which could be trained to help with tasks and labor. Because of the growth of maritime trade, middlemen in trade networks were quickly cut out of the equation, as technological advances made it easier to get from start to finish of a long voyage.
The shaving compass was Chinese invention, and the compass was created in 206 BCE, but was not used as a maritime exploration until the 12th century. Knowledge about the Chinese tech came from explorers and merchants such as Marco Polo, who journeyed the Yuan dynasty and gained key knowledge in inventions and culture. He recorded his findings in a book which gave Europeans the knowledge and interest in Chinese practices. Additionally, these inventions diffused through Africa or Asia by way of the trade networks such as the Silk Roads.
When you try your best but you don't succeed.
Through the beginning of global overseas exploration, many people believed that the Earth was flat, and if you sailed too far, you would fall off. Although the concept of a round Earth dates back to 6th century BCE, it wasn't until Ferdinand Magellan's circumnavigation that this became an accepted theory. Zheng He's voyages in the Indian Ocean served to showcase Chinese wealth, power, and culture, and to gain knowledge of the lands in the Indian Ocean. He led 7 naval expeditions between 1405 and 1433.
Silver!
Silver was a key part of the global economy, as Europe heavily imported Chinese goods, and China's economy was centered around silver. This made the acquisition of silver an important industry in the Americas. European colonists would use slave laborers to mine for silver in Latin and Mesoamerica. The European colonists weren't the only thing competing in the Americas. The animals and plants they brought with them disrupted local food webs and environments. This caused extinctions of native plants and animals, as this new source of competition created a low brink for natural selection, and thus increased evolutionary pressures on native species. European colonists and the slaves they brought with them carried germs that were completely foreign to Native Americans' immune systems. Diseases native to Europe, such as smallpox, influenza, and measles, rapidly decimated Native American populations because they had no resistance or previous exposure to the diseases. Another reason why so many natives died is because the colonists had a huge military advantage over them, bringing guns and steel armor, while the natives used much simpler weapons such as the bow and arrow. Before Johann Gutenberg introduced the printing press to Europe, bookmakers had to write out each page by hand, which took a painstakingly long time. However, inventions such as the printing press and movable type allowed for books to be created much more quickly, enabling more people to learn how to read and gain knowledge about the world. This also gave increased value to handwritten books, as books that were created using a printing press were much more common and cheap. In the American colonies, Spanish social structure dictated that one's role in society was equivalent to how close to European descent they were. This was created by Spanish elites who came to the Americas, and it was called the casta. Thus, mixings of races created differing social classes, the top being those who were born in Europe and came to the Americas, and the bottom casta being the African slaves.